Hello, welcome back to Every Rock Has a Story. I'm so glad to see you. I hope you've enjoyed the episodes you've watched so far. This is my 46th episode, and this one is special because today I'm going to answer a question that I've been getting from a lot of viewers out there, which is this: how can I make my own Every Rock Has a story? I'm going to tell you how you can create a story out of any rock you've got in your own collection. Now, there's just 7 steps to making a good story, and here they are. We'll go through them in this video together. First, you have to get a rock. You have to tell us where you found it. Tell us what you see. Try to identify the rock. Make up a really interesting story about the rock. Don't worry if you're wrong, and then maybe suggest some ways to test your story. And the last requirement, the most important of all, is to have fun when you're making your story. The first step, getting a rock, is what the last episode, episode 45, was all about. You can find a rock whether you live in the city, in the country, any place at all. So watch that episode for some tips. But even if you don't collect your own rock, you could get a rock as a gift from a friend or a relative. Some people might buy a rock at a gift shop or in a rock shop. You can tell a story about any rock at all. But once you've got one, like we got one, this one right here in episode 45, we'll be talking about this one. Now it's time for the next step, which is to tell us a little bit about where you found the rock. You could tell us about the town you collected it. This was from Carlisle, the state, Massachusetts, or the country. This is from the United States. Or you can tell a little bit more about what it was like when you collected it. There was a big outcrop in the distance behind where this one came from, but this came from a small boulder sort of on the path. And I chipped it off with my rock hammer. Remember that in episode 45? After you tell us something about what you've seen, you can also, if you want, do a little research, and you can find something called a geologic map online or at the library. This is a picture of the geologic map of the state of Massachusetts, where I found this rock. And we can zoom in here, and we can see exactly where I found this rock. It was right there in Carlisle. And that sort of yellow-green rock is labeled here, and I can look in the key of this map, and it'll tell me a little bit about what the rocks are like in this location. I'll tell you about that in the next episode, where I tell you the story of this rock entirely. I'll tell you what I learned. Once you've told us a little bit, as much as you can, about where you found the rock, now just tell us what you see. This part's fun, and it's easy too. Just look at the rock. And I see some silvery sparkles. I see some light pink. When we collected the rock, we noticed those nice dark red bits right there. Dark red crystals. You can use a magnifying glass to look up close. Some of those had nice crystal facets, which we can talk about later. See that? That is the label that I drew on the rock. C1, C for Carlisle, 1 for sample number 1. That is part of the story of this rock too, now that I painted on it. You can talk about the size of the crystals. You can look for layers, all that kind of stuff. That will help you get ready for the next part, which is to try your best to identify what kind of rock it is. Now, don't worry if you get it right. And it's okay to say, I'm not sure what kind of rock it is, or maybe I have a couple different guesses. That's fine, but try to tell us. I would recommend starting by seeing if you can say if the rock is igneous, sedimentary, or metamorphic. An igneous rock, like this one that we collected in Carlisle, doesn't usually have any layers. You don't see layers in an igneous rock, but you can see different crystals of different sizes, and they're often kind of interlocking together. It makes it very sort of a hard, very, very firm rock, like this one right here. And the crystals can be different size. Big crystals might mean it had a long time to form inside the earth. Teeny crystals mean it might have been from a volcano that erupted at the surface. A sedimentary rock usually does have layers. It grows in flat layers, which you can kind of see in this one here. And those flat layers, because it forms at the surface. If you're really lucky, you might even see some fossils like those leaves in a sedimentary rock. Usually you won't find those. But those flat layers and fine grains or coarse grain size is a sedimentary rock from the surface. Metamorphic rocks sometimes have layers too, but the layers in metamorphic rocks tend to be wavy. See all those wavy layers there? That's because they be squeezed. They get squeezed and deformed and heated up deep in the earth. Once you have an idea whether it's igneous or sedimentary or metamorphic, or whether part of the story has been changed by humans, like my label, or life, lichen or moss or other parts of life, then you're ready to tell that story, which is the next step. Sometimes people want to do a little bit of extra research about their rock. You don't have to do that, but if you want to, you can look at a great rock book, and there's lots of examples. I can give you some suggestions in the little notes below this video. Or I want to tell you about one great organization that has a website online. It's called the Mineralogical Society of America. And this is their website. And if you go there, right at the top, there's a little place that talks about education and outreach. And in there, there's tons of different links to different resources, so much great information. And especially this one, there's something called Mineralogy for Kids. It's a great place to go for resources to learn about rocks and minerals for kids of all ages. So if you want to learn a little bit more about your rock, try to make some even better guesses, you can do that online exploration or use some rock and mineral books. If you want, you can even go a step further. With your parents or maybe an older brother or sister, there are some magazines here called Elements Magazine. That's one of my very favorite magazines that I like to read as a professor of geoscience. And you can also find these at the Mineralogical Society of America. Every issue is about a different thing, but this one's about the mineral garnet, this one's about the mineral zircon, and this one is about something called a pegmatite. I chose these three because they're going to help me tell this rock's story. So we'll get there in a little while. Well, once you've done your research, you've collected your rock, you've talked about what you've seen when you collected it, and when you look at the rock itself, now you're ready to make up your story. Have fun. It can be about anything. If it's an igneous rock, it's probably going to be about molten rock deep in the earth if the grains are large, or erupting in a volcano at the surface if the grains are very, very small. If it's a sedimentary rock, it could be about things happening on the earth, ancient climates, ancient life in fossils or rivers or streams or the wind blowing across the land. And a metamorphic rock usually tells a story about continents colliding in extremely high pressure and burial and high temperature, twisting and transforming that rock because of tectonic processes. And don't forget those stories of the human impact, cracks or human-made rocks or even mosses or lichens that get on a rock and can transform that story too. Remember, episode 8 was all about what the road's made of. Those are interesting stories too. The man-made rocks that you can find out in the world. The last thing that I would suggest, don't worry if your story is perfect. Don't worry if your story is completely right. Actually, scientists always start off with stories, right? We start off with good guesses. We try to make guesses as well as we can. Sometimes really good guesses end up being wrong. And sometimes really crazy guesses end up being right. So don't worry if your story is perfect, but see if you can think of a way that you might test some part of your story to figure out what parts of your story might be true and what parts might end up being make-believe. That's what scientists do. They think of ways to test their ideas and just have fun. When you're done, share it with others. You can share it with a friend, you can share it with your parents, you can share it with the scientist, and if you want, you could send it to me. I would be happy to take a look at any stories that you've told about the rocks in your collection. I hope you've enjoyed this special episode of Every Rock Has a Story, and if you watch my next episode, I will show you how I've used these steps to tell the story of this rock. Bye-bye.